a young beggar invades the church with a baby and destroys the millionaire's wedding, shouting, "He's your son!" All the guests were in shock, and the millionaire nearly fainted upon seeing the baby. The majestic St. Lawrence Cathedral stood proudly against the cloudy Sunday morning sky, its Gothic spires piercing the autumn mist like ancient guardians of faith. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation as the city's elite gathered for what promised to be the wedding of the year. Alexander Montgomery, the most influential businessman in the region, was about to marry the stunning socialite Victoria Romanov. White and gold flowers adorned every surface, their delicate petals catching the light filtering through the stained glass windows. The guest list read like a who's who of high society, with women in designer gowns and men in perfectly tailored suits filling the wooden pews. The gentle melody of the orchestra floated through the sacred space, creating an ethereal atmosphere of beauty. Behind the massive oak doors, Victoria stood in her custom Vera Wang gown, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her diamond-studded veil. The dress, with its intricate lace details and flowing train, had been featured in several fashion magazines before the wedding. Her bridesmaids bustled around her, making final touches to ensure everything was perfect. At the altar, Alexander exuded confidence in his Tom Ford tuxedo. At 42, he was at the peak of success, having transformed his father's modest business into a global enterprise. His steely blue eyes scanned the gathered crowd with satisfaction, while his strong jaw and perfectly groomed silver-streaked hair gave him the appearance of a man who had everything under control. The wedding planner, Martha Sanders, moved efficiently through the church, directing the final preparations with military precision. She had orchestrated countless high-profile weddings, but this would be her masterpiece. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from the imported flowers to the hand-painted place cards. Victoria's father, Judge Romanoff, waited proudly to escort his daughter down the aisle. The marriage would unite two of the state's most prestigious families, a union that would strengthen both their social and business ties. The atmosphere was electric with excitement and expectation. The first notes of the wedding march began to play, and the guests rose in anticipation. The cathedral's massive doors began to open, but instead of revealing the radiant bride, they slammed against the walls with unexpected force, startling the entire congregation. On the threshold stood a scene that would forever be etched in the memory of everyone present. A girl, no more than 9 years old, stood there barefoot, her dress torn and dirty, her hair wild and tangled. In her arms, she cradled a baby, wrapped in a tattered blanket. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes shone with determination. The orchestra's music came to an abrupt halt, leaving an uneasy silence broken only by the faint whimpers of the newborn. The girl took a few hesitant steps forward, her dirty feet leaving marks on the pristine white carpet. The guests watched, in horror as this unexpected intruder made her way down the aisle, each step echoing in the stunned silence. Alexander's confidence wavered as he caught sight of the girl. His face paled, and for the first time in his life, the man who could command any boardroom found himself utterly powerless. Behind the doors, Victoria froze, her perfect moment shattered by the commotion she could hear coming from the church. The girl stopped halfway down the aisle, her small body trembling with emotion. She looked directly at Alexander, her young voice ringing clearly through the cathedral as she spoke the words that would change everything. "He's your son." The impact was immediate and devastating. Gasps echoed through the church, followed by furious whispers. Phones emerged from pockets and purses as guests began secretly recording the drama unfolding before them. Victoria's father stepped forward, his judicial composure slipping as he demanded an explanation. The girl continued to move toward the altar, shielding the baby as if her life depended on it. Her next words came in a torrent, filled with both pain and accusation. "My mother told me to find you. She said you needed to know about him. She said you would help us." Alexander staggered back, his hand clutching the altar for support. The baby began to cry louder, his wails echoing against the vaulted ceiling. The sound seemed to pierce through the chaos, a harsh reminder of the innocent life at the center of this unfolding drama. Victoria finally emerged from behind the doors, her flawless makeup now streaked with tears. She stopped at the entrance of the church, observing the scene before her with growing horror. The bouquet slipped from her trembling fingers, white roses scattering across the floor like abandoned dreams. "Alexander!" Her voice broke as she called out to her fiancé, desperate for him to deny everything, to make this nightmare disappear. But Alexander remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the child in the girl's arms. His silence spoke volumes, confirming what everyone in the church already suspected. The girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a silver chain with a distinctive pendant, an exact copy of the one Alexander wore around his neck. It was a family heirloom, passed down through generations among the Montgomery men. The sight of the object sparked another wave of whispers among the onlookers. "My mother said you gave it to her," the girl explained, her voice steadier now. "She said it was a promise that you would always remember her." She held out the necklace, the pendant catching the light from the stained glass windows, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that danced across the church walls. Before Alexander could respond, a commotion erupted at the church entrance. A man in an expensive but rumpled suit pushed his way through the crowd. Vincent Colombo, Alexander's former business partner, strode down the aisle with an air of authority that made several guests shrink back in their seats. "Sophia, come here right now," Vincent ordered, extending his hand toward the girl. "Your mother entrusted you to my care, and this little performance of yours ends now." His voice was calm, but carried a subtle threat that made the girl clutch, the child tighter in her arms. The girl, Sophia, vigorously shook her head. "No, Mum said not to trust you. She said to trust only him." She pointed at Alexander, who finally seemed to snap out of his paralysis. Something in Sophia's fearful eyes ignited a protective instinct in him. "Vincent," Alexander's voice rang out, regaining its authority. "What are you doing here?" He stepped down from the altar, positioning himself between Vincent and the children. The tension in the church reached its peak as the two men faced off. Victoria's brother, James, a prominent lawyer, stepped forward to stand beside Alexander. "I suggest you take a step back, Mr. Colombo," he said firmly. "The police are already on their way." The mention of law enforcement made Vincent hesitate, his confident facade wavering slightly. Meanwhile, Victoria had sunk into a nearby pew, supported by her mother and sisters. Her perfect wedding day had turned into a public scandal that would undoubtedly make headlines across the country. Years of planning, months of preparation, all destroyed in a matter of minutes. Sophia began to sway slightly, the emotional weight of the day finally catching up to her. The child in her arms had developed a slight fever, his little face flushed and warm. Alexander noticed their discomfort and made a decision that would change the course of all their lives. "These children need medical attention," he announced, his voice carrying the same authority with which he had built his empire. "Victoria, I—" turned to his fiancée, but she raised a hand to stop him, unable to bear any explanation at that moment. The following minutes passed in a whirlwind of activity. Emergency medical services arrived, closely followed by the police. Vincent was held for questioning after several guests reported his threatening behavior. The child was rushed to the hospital, with Sophia refusing to leave his side. As chaos unfolded, Alexander found himself torn between his obligations to his fiancée and his unexpected responsibility toward these children. Victoria's father approached him with a grave expression. "You have exactly 1 hour to get to the hospital and sort out this mess," he said quietly. "Then you will return here and explain yourself to my daughter." The guests began to leave the church, their phones already buzzing with messages and social media notifications. The story was spreading like wildfire among the city's elite circles. By evening, it would become national news, the perfect scandal to satisfy the public's appetite for drama. Martha Sanders, the wedding planner, stood in the middle of the church observing the aftermath of her ruined masterpiece. Scattered flowers, abandoned programs, and the lonely wedding cake in the reception hall, all witnesses to the day that wasn't. She caught Alexander's eye and gave him a small, sad nod. In her 20 years of organizing weddings, she had never seen anything like it. The pristine halls of St. Lawrence Hospital offered no comfort to Alexander as he paced back and forth outside the pediatric ward. Through the observation window, he could see Sophia sitting beside the baby's crib. her small hand reaching through the bars to hold her brother's tiny fingers. The medical staff had immediately admitted the newborn, concerned about his high temperature and signs of malnutrition. Dr. Helen Rodriguez, the on-duty pediatrician, approached Alexander with a tablet in hand. "Mr. Montgomery, we need to discuss the baby's condition," she said, her professional demeanor masking her curiosity about the situation. "He is severely dehydrated and shows signs of inadequate care. We've started administering fluids, but we'll need to keep him under observation for at least 48 hours. Alexander nodded, his mind racing with questions. The DNA test he had requested would take days to process, but looking at the sleeping newborn, he couldn't deny the striking resemblance to his own childhood photos. The same distinctive nose and chin that had marked every male in his family for generations. Sophia had finally fallen asleep in the chair beside the crib, exhaustion overwhelming her small body. A social worker, Mrs. Patricia Bennett, sat nearby, supervising both children while taking notes for her preliminary report. The hospital staff had provided Sophia with clean clothes and attended to her immediate needs, but the emotional trauma she had endured was evident in her restless sleep. Alexander's phone buzzed constantly with messages from his public relations team, board members, and Victoria's family. The story had already hit social media, with Fouke Montgomery wedding scandal trending nationally. His carefully cultivated public image was crumbling by the minute, but for the first time in his life, that wasn't his primary concern. A soft knock on the door caught his attention. James Romanoff, Victoria's brother, stood there in his perfectly pressed suit, looking somewhat out of place in the pediatric ward. "We need to talk," he said quietly, gesturing toward the family consultation room. Inside the private room, James wasted no time on pleasantries. "Vincent Colombo has been released," he informed Alexander. "He claims to be the legal guardian of the children, appointed by their mother before her death. He has documents to support his claim, but something doesn't add up." Alexander slumped into one of the chairs, loosening his bow tie. Sophia said her mother had warned her not to trust Vincent. There must be more to this story. He ran his hands through his hair, disrupting his usual impeccable appearance. "And Victoria?" James's expression softened slightly. "She's devastated, as you can imagine. The media circus isn't helping. Every gossip journalist in the country is trying to get a statement from her. Our father took her to our summer house in the Hamptons to avoid the press." The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Bennett entering the room. "Mr. Montgomery, Sophia is awake and asking for you. She says there's something important she needs to tell you about Mr. Colombo." Her professional tone couldn't entirely hide her concern for the young girl. In the pediatric wing, Sophia straightened up as Alexander approached. Her eyes, wise beyond her years, studied him carefully before she spoke. "Mom left some letters," she said softly. "Mr. Colombo doesn't know. They're hidden in her special box, the one she told me never to show to anyone except you." Alexander knelt beside her chair, trying to appear less intimidating to the frightened child. "Sophia, can you tell me more about your mom? What happened?" He kept his voice gentle, aware of the trauma the girl had already endured. Sophia's lower lip trembled, but she maintained her composure. "Her name was Clara Martin. She worked at the Grand Hotel Marina during the summer charity gala 3 years ago. She said that's where she met you." Her words hit Alexander like punches as memories of that summer resurfaced. The Grand Hotel Marina Gala had been one of his company's largest charity events. Clara had been part of the event planning team, her creativity and dedication catching his attention. They had spent several weeks working closely together, their professional relationship evolving into something more personal. But when the event ended, he had returned to his structured life and his commitment to Victoria, considering their time together as nothing more than a brief deviation from his carefully planned future. Now, looking at Sophia and the child, Alexander realized the true cost of his choices. Clara had kept their child a secret, facing her struggles alone rather than disrupting his life. The weight of guilt crushed him as he recalled her attempts to contact him afterward. Messages he had delegated to his assistant, calls he had never returned. Victoria Romanoff sat in the library of her family's beach house, surrounded by the comfort of old books and childhood memories. The television was muted, but she could still see her annulled marriage making headlines on every channel. Her perfectly planned future had shattered like crystal, leaving her to pick up the pieces while the entire world watched. Her sister, Eleanor, entered with a cup of chamomile tea and the latest updates from their family lawyer. "James called," she said, sitting beside Victoria on the window seat. "The situation at the hospital is complicated. The child is under medical care, and there are questions about the legal guardian's credentials." Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she took the teacup. "I keep thinking about that little girl's face," she whispered. "She seemed so frightened, so desperate. How is it possible that none of us knew about them? How did I not see what was happening?" The questions that had been tormenting her since the church now poured out freely. A notification on her phone caught her attention. Another message from Alexander. She had dozens by now, all unread. Part of her wanted to delete them all, to erase every trace of the man who had humiliated her so publicly, but another part, the one that still remembered 13 years of shared history, couldn't let go so easily. "There's more," Catherine said cautiously. "The media is spreading stories about Vincent Colombo's past. His dealings with Montgomery Industries in recent years have been questionable. James thinks he might be using these children as leverage for something bigger." Victoria's legal training kicked in, temporarily overshadowing her personal pain. "What kind of dealings?" she asked, her mind already analyzing potential scenarios. Despite her current situation, years of experience in corporate law couldn't be turned off so easily. Before Catherine could respond, their father entered the library. The usual authoritative presence of Judge Romanoff seemed diminished by his concern for his daughter. "Victoria, darling, there's someone here to see you. Martha Sanders, the wedding planner. She says it's important." Martha entered the library, still wearing her professional wedding attire, though her usually composed demeanor showed signs of strain. "Mrs. Romanoff, I apologize for the intrusion, but there's something you need to know about Vincent Colombo, something I observed during the chaos at the church." Victoria gestured for Martha to sit, her curiosity piqued. Martha had organized countless high society weddings. She was known for her discretion and attention to detail. If she felt compelled to come here in person, it had to be something significant. "During the commotion, I was trying to maintain some order near the entrance," Martha began. "I overheard Mr. Colombo on the phone before he entered the church. He was giving instructions to someone, talking about leverage and deals. He specifically mentioned using the children to force Mr. Montgomery to cooperate in some business matter." The revelation hung in the air like thick smoke. Victoria's legal mind began connecting dots she hadn't seen before. Alexander's recent distraction, the sudden issues with some corporate contracts, his growing anxiety about board meetings, details that had seemed minor at the time now took on new significance. "There's more," Martha continued, opening her tablet to show her something. "As part of the wedding preparations, we had installed security cameras around the church. They captured Mr. Colombo arriving at the church before the ceremony, speaking with several men in his car. At the time, it seemed odd, but now..." Judge Romanoff leaned forward, his judicial instincts awakened. "Martha, would you be willing to provide this information to our family's legal team and the security footage?" The wedding planner nodded, clearly relieved to share her concerns with someone who could take action. Victoria stood up abruptly, surprising everyone in the room. "I need to go to the hospital," she announced. Her family began to protest, but she raised a hand. "Not for Alexander. For that little girl and her brother. If Vincent Colombo is using them as pawns in some corporate game, they need protection. They need someone on their side who isn't involved in whatever corporate scheme he's orchestrating." Katerina grabbed her sister's arm. "Vicky, think about it. The media is camped outside the hospital. The moment you show up there, it'll be a frenzy." Her concern was valid. Every news outlet in the country was waiting for Victoria's first public appearance since the wedding disaster. "Then we'll need a plan," Victoria replied, her professional determination resurfacing. "Martha, you're still officially in charge of the wedding arrangements, right? That means you have authority over all the vendors, including the security team we hired. A strategy was already forming in her mind, drawing on years of experience. Managing delicate corporate situations. The private pediatric room at St. Mary's Hospital had become a temporary command center. Alexander sat beside the crib of the sleeping baby, his laptop open to countless emails from his board of directors, while Sophia dozed restlessly on a small couch nearby. The social worker, Mrs. Bennett, had stepped out briefly to present her preliminary report, leaving them under the watchful eye of the hospital's security. A soft knock interrupted the quiet scene. Dr. Rodriguez entered with another set of test results, her expression cautiously optimistic. "The baby's fever has gone down, Mr. Montgomery," she reported. "His vitals are improving, but we're still concerned about his weight and overall development." Alexander nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, doctor. And please call me Alexander." He looked at the sleeping newborn, marveling at how such a tiny being could completely upend his structured world. The baby, he didn't even know his name yet, had Clara's delicate features mixed with unmistakable Montgomery traits. Sophia stirred on the couch, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "His name is Thomas," she said softly, as if reading Alexander's thoughts. "Mom named him after her grandfather. She said he was the only one in her family who always believed in her." Before Alexander could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his security team. Vincent Colombo had been seen entering the hospital through a side entrance, accompanied by two men in suits. Alexander's jaw tightened as he recalled Sophia's revelations about the hidden letters. "Sophia," he said gently, moving to sit beside her, "you mentioned your mum's special box with the letters. Can you tell me more about it? It's important." He kept his voice calm, not wanting to frighten her with the urgency of the situation. The girl's eyes darted nervously toward the door before she spoke. "Mum kept everything in a purple jewelry box with silver butterflies on it. She hid it under the floorboard beneath the bed." Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mr. Colombo came to our house many times, looking for some documents. He said Mom owed him money, but she said he was lying." Alexander's mind began to race. Clara had been an event organizer at the Grand Hotel Marina when they first met, but, according to Sophia, she had later taken a job at one of Colombo's companies. The timing couldn't be a coincidence. A commotion in the hallway caught their attention. Through the door window, Alexander could see the hospital security confronting Vincent and his associates, but what happened next took everyone by surprise. Victoria Romanoff strode down the hallway, flanked by her brother James and two members of her family's legal team. She didn't look at all like the devastated bride who had fled the church. Now she exuded an air of professional authority in a perfectly tailored suit, her expression resolute. The security guards immediately deferred to her presence. After all, the Romanoff family was one of the hospital's largest donors. Vincent Colombo's confidence wavered as Victoria approached him, legal documents in hand. "Mr. Colombo," her voice rang clearly through the door, "I have here an emergency injunction preventing you from approaching these children until your custody claims are properly verified. I've also taken the liberty of informing the SEC about some interesting discrepancies in your recent financial filings." Alexander watched in awe as his ex-fiancée effectively took control of the situation. She hadn't come here for him. She had come to protect two innocent children from being used as pawns in whatever game Colombo was playing. Sophia clung closer to Alexander, gripping his arm. "Mom said Victoria was different," she whispered. "She said Victoria was the kind of person who would do the right thing, even when it hurt." The girl's words hit Alexander like a punch, making him wonder how much Clara had known about his life. Through the window, they could see Vincent Colombo retreating, his face darkened by barely contained rage. Victoria remained in the hallway, calmly speaking with the hospital administration to increase security measures. Her professional mask faltered only once when she glanced through the window and locked eyes with Alexander. In that brief moment, a flood of unspoken words passed between them. 13 years of history couldn't be erased by one devastating morning, no matter how public the humiliation had been. Victoria quickly looked away, but not before Alexander caught a glimpse of the pain she hid behind her professional demeanor. The meeting room at Montgomery Industries was empty, except for James Romanoff, who had spread dozens of financial documents across the polished mahogany table. His sister's cancelled wedding had suddenly catapulted him into an investigation. That grew more unsettling with every document he examined. Victoria entered the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the luxurious cafe downstairs. She had changed from her earlier hospital attire, now wearing a blazer and more casual jeans, though her professional demeanor remained intact. "The press is still camped outside," she reported, setting a cup in front of her brother. "But they're more interested in Columbo's corner now than the wedding scandal." James nodded distractedly, his attention fixed on his laptop screen. "Look at this," he said, turning the screen toward her. 3 years ago, Columbo's company was on the brink of collapse. Then suddenly they received a massive capital injection from an anonymous investor. The timing coincides exactly with when Clara Martin started working for them. Victoria stepped closer, her legal training kicking in as she analyzed the documents. "These transaction patterns, they're designed to hide something. But what would an event planner have to do with corporate finances?" She pulled up another chair, fully committing to the investigation, despite her personal connection to the case. "Maybe she saw something she wasn't supposed to see," suggested James. "The question is, what was Columbo really using her position for?" He pulled out another document, this time showing a series of high-profile events organized by Columbo's company. Each of these galas, charity functions, and corporate parties had one thing in common. They all involved potential investors or business rivals of Montgomery Industries. Victoria's eyes widened as she began connecting the dots. She was using the events to gather information, industrial espionage disguised as high society parties. She stood up, pacing the room as her mind raced. And Clara would have had access to everything. Guest lists, private conversations, confidential meetings held during these events. Their discussion was interrupted by a knock at the door. Martha Sanders entered, carrying a large accordion folder. "I found something interesting in the wedding preparation documents," she said, showing a series of photographs. "These were taken at various high society events over the past 3 years. Look who appears in the background of each one." The photos showed Clara Martin at work at different high-profile functions, always positioned near groups of corporate executives. But even more revealing, Vincent Columbo could be seen in every photo, watching her from a distance. She wasn't just an employee, Victoria realized. She was his asset whether she knew it or not. But something changed. She picked up one of the more recent photos, studying it closely. "Look at her expression in this one. She looks scared." James pulled out another financial record. Around that time, Columbo's company started experiencing unusual financial fluctuations. Large sums of money moving through multiple accounts, only to disappear completely. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I think Clara figured out what was really going on. That's why she left those letters for Alexander." Victoria's phone buzzed with a message from the hospital. "Sophia is ready to talk more about the letters," she read. "She says there's something specific about Columbo in them, something her mother wanted Alexander to know." She gathered her things, preparing to leave. "Vicky," James called, his voice softening. "Are you sure you want to be involved in this? No one would blame you if you walked away." His concern for his sister was evident in his gaze. Victoria paused, at the door, gripping the handle tightly. "Those children need help," she said firmly. "Whatever Vincent is doing, he's willing to use an innocent child and a frightened girl to protect himself. Someone has to stop him." She didn't add that helping those children felt like the right thing to do, even if it meant facing Alexander again. Back at the hospital, Sophia had been moved to a more comfortable family room adjacent to Thomas's medical suite. The boy was showing significant improvement, though the doctors wanted to keep him under observation for at least another day. Alexander was sitting with Sophia, listening intently as she described the hidden box containing her mother's letters. "Mum said the purple box wasn't just for letters," Sophia explained, her young voice filled with her mother's confidence. "She said there were other things in it too, important documents that Mr. Columbo was looking for. She made me promise not to tell anyone except Mr. Montgomery." Alexander's private security team arrived at Clara's modest apartment, just as the sun was setting. The building's caretaker, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, led them to the apartment, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the door. "Such a sweet woman, Clara," she murmured. "She always helped me with groceries, never complained about anything." The apartment told the story of a modest but dignified life. Framed photos of Sophia and Thomas adorned the walls, while neat stacks of business magazines and event planning portfolios filled the shelves. Everything was meticulously organized, suggesting that Clara's attention to detail extended to her personal life as well. Sophia had drawn a detailed map, showing exactly where to find the purple jewelry box. Alexander knelt beside Clara's bed, his fingers finding the loose floorboard she had described. Inside the small cavity, wrapped in a silk scarf, was a purple box decorated with silver butterflies. His security team had already swept the apartment for any surveillance devices, a necessary precaution given Colombo's involvement. Finding none, Alexander carefully opened the box, his heart pounding as he uncovered its contents. A stack of handwritten letters, USB drives, and, to his great surprise, a leather-bound journal. The first letter was addressed to him, dated just 3 months prior. "Dear Alexander, if you're reading this, it means I failed to protect our children. I never wanted to disrupt your life or cause you pain, but circumstances forced me to act. What started as a simple job at Colombo Enterprises turned into something far more dangerous than I ever imagined. Vincent Colombo is not who he claims to be. The charity events, the social gatherings, they were all elaborate covers for something much darker. I discovered financial records showing millions of dollars funneled through fake charity foundations, money from insider trading schemes gathered during these events. I tried to leave quietly when I realized what was happening, but Vincent threatened to expose my connection to you and ruin your reputation just weeks before your wedding. He knew about Thomas, knew he was yours, and promised to use that information to destroy everything you'd built. But I couldn't stay silent when I discovered his plans for Montgomery Industries. The USB drives contain everything: financial records, recorded conversations, evidence of his systematic campaign to infiltrate and take control of your company through shell corporations and manipulated stocks. I'm so sorry for keeping Thomas away from you. I convinced myself it was for the best, that you had your life and your future ahead of you, but our son deserves to know his father, and Sophia deserves a chance at a better life than I could give her. Please protect them. Vincent Colombo will stop at nothing to keep his plans hidden. With love and regret, Clara." Alexander's hands trembled as he finished reading. The weight of Clara's words, her sacrifices, and the danger she had faced alone pressed down on him like a physical burden. He carefully gathered the contents of the box, making sure nothing was left behind. Back at the hospital, Victoria had stayed with the children while Alexander retrieved the letters. She was sitting in the family room, watching Sophia teach Thomas a fun game with her stuffed animals. Despite her inner turmoil, she couldn't help but be moved by the girl's devotion to her little brother. "You're good with them," Alexander said softly from the doorway, making her jump. Victoria turned and found him looking exhausted, his usual impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. In his hands, he held a purple box that seemed to carry the weight of all their unspoken words. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Victoria asked, maintaining a professional tone despite the intimacy of the moment. The children's laughter contrasted sharply with the tension between the adults. Alexander slumped into a nearby chair, clutching the box to his chest. "Clara left some letters," he said quietly, "and evidence. Evidence that could destroy Colombo and protect Montgomery Industries. But more importantly, she left the truth about why she kept Thomas a secret." Before he could continue, Sophia approached, her young face serious. "Did you find Mum's special box?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "She said there were important things inside, things that would protect us from Mr. Colombo." Victoria watched as Alexander gently hugged Sophia in a protective gesture, noticing how natural it seemed despite their brief acquaintance. The little girl melted into his arms, years of adult burdens finally surfacing in her exhausted body. Victoria's family beach house had been transformed into an impromptu operations room. James had distributed the contents of Clara's USB drives across multiple laptop screens, while their father, Judge Romanoff, examined the legal implications of each piece of evidence. Martha Sanders sat nearby, cross-referencing the information with her extensive archives of social events. "The pattern is incredible," James muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Every major deal, every stock fluctuation, they all correspond to Colombo's charity events. Clara documented everything." He pulled up a spreadsheet with dates, locations and names of attendees at various events. Victoria stood by the window, watching the waves crash on the shore as her mind processed the implications. "She used these events to gather confidential information," she said. "The guest lists Clara compiled, the seating arrangements, the private meeting rooms. She had access to everything. And look at this," Martha interjected, pulling out her archives. "The donations made at these events, they passed through a series of shell companies before disappearing entirely. Clara tracked every transaction." The wedding planner's attention to detail had proven invaluable in understanding the scope of Colombo's operations. Judge Romanoff removed his reading glasses, his expression grave. "This goes beyond industrial espionage," he declared. "We're talking about financial fraud, money laundering, and potential blackmail. The SEC will be very interested in this information." He turned to Victoria, concern evident. "But releasing all of this could have serious repercussions for Montgomery. Industries Alexander's reputation is already in shambles," Victoria concluded, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "But the safety of those children is more important than any corporate reputation." She picked up her phone, checking the latest message from the hospital. "Sophia is finally asleep, and Thomas's condition is improving. Alexander is with them." James looked up from his laptop, studying his sister carefully. "You still care about him?" he observed quietly. It wasn't a question. Victoria didn't respond, but her silence spoke volumes. The moment of quiet was interrupted by Martha's sharp intake of breath. "Look at this," she said, pointing at the screen. Clara had a meeting scheduled with the SEC next week. She was about to hand everything over to them. The revelation hung in the air, adding a new weight to the situation. Victoria's legal training kicked in. That's why Vincent was so desperate to find those letters, she realized. He knew Clara had evidence against him, knew she was planning to expose everything. She began pacing the room, her mind racing through the possibilities. Judge Romanoff stood up, adjusting his jacket with judicial authority. "We need to proceed carefully," he advised. "Vincent still has considerable influence, and he's already shown he's willing to use those children as leverage." He turned to James. "Make copies of everything on our secure servers immediately. We can't risk losing any of this evidence." Victoria's phone buzzed again, this time with a message that sent a chill down her spine. Alexander's security team had discovered surveillance equipment in Clara's apartment, recently installed. Vincent was watching, waiting for them to lead him to the evidence. "He knows we've found something," Victoria announced, grabbing her car keys. "I need to go to the hospital. Vincent might try to use the children to force Alexander to cooperate." The others began to protest, but she cut them off. "I'm not asking for permission. Those children need protection, and Alexander needs to know what we've uncovered." The drive to the hospital felt endless, despite the late hour and minimal traffic. Victoria's mind wandered to the last time she'd made this trip. Just that morning, when she'd come face to face with Vincent in the hallway. So much had changed in a single day. She found Alexander in Thomas's room, the boy finally asleep peacefully as his father watched over him. Sophia had been moved to a proper bed in an adjacent room with a security guard posted outside the door. The sight of Alexander tenderly adjusting Thomas's blanket made Victoria's heart ache with emotions she wasn't ready to examine. "We found something in Clara's files," she said softly, not wanting to wake the child. Alexander looked up, exhaustion evident in his features. Vincent wasn't just using the events for corporate espionage. He was running a sophisticated fraud operation, and Clara had the evidence. She was planning to expose everything. The steady beep of the medical monitors provided a constant rhythm in Thomas's hospital room as Alexander absorbed Victoria's revelations about Vincent's operations. The serene expression on the sleeping child's face stood in stark contrast to the tension in the room. "Clara was about to reveal everything," continued Victoria, her voice barely a whisper. She had documented every transaction, every manipulation. The evidence is overwhelming. She watched as Alexander gently stroked Thomas's tiny hand, noticing how natural he seemed in his new role as a father. Alexander's response was interrupted by the soft footsteps of Sophia. The little girl stood at the door of her adjoining room, clutching a worn teddy bear. "I couldn't sleep," she explained, her young face showing signs of anxiety. "I keep thinking about Mr. Columbo finding us." Victoria immediately moved to comfort her, surprised by how protective she felt toward this child who had disrupted her perfectly planned life. "Come here, sweetheart," she said, patting the cushioned seat by the window. Sophia hesitated only a moment before snuggling next to her. "Your mother was very brave," said Alexander, approaching them while keeping an eye on Thomas's crib. "She kept detailed records of everything she discovered." He watched Sophia's fingers nervously playing with the worn ear of her teddy bear. "Mom wrote in her diary every night," Sophia shared, her voice small but steady. "She said writing the truth was important, even if you couldn't tell anyone yet." She looked up at Victoria with unexpected wisdom in her young eyes. "She knew about you, you know. She said you were the kind of person who would fight for what's right." Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion. Before she could respond, Dr. Rodriguez entered with the results of Thomas's latest tests. "The baby is showing remarkable improvement," she reported, checking the monitors. "If this continues, you might be able to take him home in a few days." She paused, noticing the tension in the room. "Is everything all right?" Alexander exchanged a glance with Victoria before addressing the doctor. "We might need to extend Thomas's stay," he said cautiously. "There are some security concerns we're dealing with." The doctor's expression showed she understood the gravity of the situation. Just then, James arrived with urgent news. "Columbo is making moves," he announced, closing the door behind him. "He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's going to try to force a vote of no confidence in Alexander's leadership." "He's getting desperate," analyzed Victoria, her legal mind racing. "He knows we've found Clara's evidence and is trying to take control before we can use it." She stood up, pacing the room as she weighed their options. Sophia watched the adults with growing concern. "Mum said there was something else," she offered hesitantly. "Something she hid separately from the purple box. She said it was insurance, in case something happened to her." All eyes turned to the little girl as she continued. "She kept it in a safety deposit box at the bank." She paused, then added, "She made me memorize the number 22319. He said that Mr. Columbo would never have thought to look there because it wasn't under his name." Alexander knelt beside Sophia, keeping his voice gentle. "Do you know whose name it was under?" The little girl nodded, glancing at Victoria before answering. "Yours," she said to Victoria. "Mom used your name because she said no one would question Victoria Romanov having a safety deposit box at the largest bank in the city. She said it was the perfect hiding spot because Mr. Columbo would never think to look there." Victoria's surprise was evident. "My name, but how? I never opened—" Her voice trailed off as realization dawned on her. "The charity gala 3 years ago. I remember signing several documents for new accounts to handle donations. Clara must have slipped the request for the safety deposit box among those papers." "It was brilliant," admitted James. "Columbo would have been monitoring Clara's accounts, but he would never have thought to check Victoria's, especially during that time." He pulled out his phone, already making plans. "The bank opens at 9. We need to get whatever's in that box before Columbo realizes it exists." Dr. Rodriguez, who had been silently observing, chimed in. "If you need to move the children for their safety, I can arrange medical transport. We sometimes use it for high-profile patients who need privacy." Her offer reminded them that they had allies in unexpected places. As they discussed logistics, Sophia gradually fell asleep on Victoria's shoulder, the exhaustion of the past few days finally catching up to her. Victoria found herself absent-mindedly stroking the girl's hair, a protective instinct she didn't know she had emerging naturally. The first rays of dawn painted the hospital corridors with a golden light as Victoria prepared to leave for the bank. She had borrowed clothes from the hospital store, a simple blouse and pants that would help her blend in with the morning bank crowd. Her designer wedding attire from yesterday seemed to belong to another life. The board meeting starts at 10, James reminded, reviewing security arrangements on his tablet. Columbo is already rallying his supporters. We need whatever's in that safety deposit box before he makes his move. He looked up at his sister with concern. Are you sure you want to do this alone? We could send someone. It's under my name, Victoria interrupted. And Clara trusted me, even if she never said it directly. I have to do this. She checked her reflection in the window, adjusting her appearance to match her usual polished look despite the borrowed clothes. Alexander approached, having just finished consulting with his security team. Dr. Rodriguez has arranged for Thomas and Sophia to be transferred to the private pediatric wing, he reported. The entire floor has limited access, and my team has vetted all the medical staff. He hesitated before adding, "Thank you, Victoria, for everything." Their eyes briefly met, years of shared history and trust creating an understanding that transcended their current complicated situation. Victoria nodded quickly, unable to fully process the emotions behind that simple exchange. Sophia, who had been silently observing from her new room, suddenly ran to Victoria and hugged her tightly. "Mom said you would help us," she whispered. She was right. Victoria knelt down to return the hug, surprised by how natural it felt to comfort this child who had disrupted her marriage just the day before. Martha Sanders arrived as Victoria was preparing to leave, carrying garment bags and her ever-present tablet. "I've arranged a diversion," she announced. "As far as the media knows, you're meeting with wedding vendors this morning to handle cancellations. They're all camped out at the main offices of the vendors in the city. The wedding planner's efficiency had proven invaluable during this crisis. She had transitioned from organizing flower deliveries to coordinating security measures with remarkable adaptability. I also took the liberty of having some bank-appropriate clothes delivered," she added, handing Victoria a small key. "They're waiting in a locker at the Premium Client Services Center." James's phone buzzed with an urgent message. "Columbo's people are starting to arrive at Montgomery Industries," he reported. "They're trying to get ahead of the board meeting." The news added pressure to an already tense situation. "I'll handle Columbo," Alexander assured, his authoritative businessman's tone returning to his voice. "The board can't vote without me present, and they'll need a strong reason to force a vote of no confidence." He turned to Victoria, his expression softening slightly. "Be careful. Columbo has eyes everywhere." Dr. Rodriguez entered with Thomas's morning medical report, providing a welcome interruption to the mounting tension. "The baby's latest tests all show improvement," she announced. "His temperature has stabilized and he's maintaining a healthy appetite." She smiled at Sophia, who had returned to stand protectively near her brother's crib. "You're doing a great job helping to take care of him." Victoria gathered her things preparing to leave. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, not just for the contents of the safety deposit box, but for the safety and future of these children who had unexpectedly entered her life. She found herself hoping that whatever Clara had hidden would be enough to protect them all from Columbo's plans. As she reached the door, Alexander called out softly, "Victoria!" She turned, finding him looking at her with an expression that mixed gratitude, regret, and something deeper she wasn't ready to analyze. "When all this is over, we need to talk about everything." She nodded briefly, unable to trust her voice. The emotions of the past 24 hours threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. With one last glance at the children, Sophia waving while Thomas slept peacefully in his crib, Victoria stepped into the hallway, ready to face whatever challenge awaited her at the bank. The marble lobby of the First Metropolitan Bank echoed with the click of Victoria's borrowed heels as she approached the Premium Client Services desk. The promised clothes from Martha were waiting for her in a private dressing room, a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that restored some of her usual confidence. The bank manager, Rebecca Conti, personally escorted Victoria to the safety deposit box. "Mrs. Romanoff, it's been a while since we've seen you," she said diplomatically, carefully avoiding any reference to the headlines from the day before. I've prepared your box as requested. Victoria followed her through the reinforced doors, her heart racing despite her calm appearance. The vault was silent, apart from their footsteps and the faint hum of the air conditioning system. Rebecca quickly located box 2319 and placed it on a table for private viewing. Take all the time you need, Rebecca reassured her, stepping out to ensure her privacy. The heavy vault door closed with a quiet but definitive click. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she opened the box. Inside, she found a sealed envelope addressed to her in elegant handwriting, along with a small USB drive and what appeared to be a man's wedding ring. She opened the envelope first. Dear Victoria, you don't know me, but I know you, not just from the society pages or charity events, but through Alexander's eyes. He kept your photo on his desk during that summer we worked together, and the way he spoke of you with such love and respect made me realize I could trust you with this. I've discovered something terrible at Colombo Enterprises. The evidence on this USB drive proves that Vincent Colombo has systematically destroyed companies from within, using information gathered during charity events to manipulate stocks and seize assets. Montgomery Industries is his ultimate target. The ring belonged to Colombo's father. Vincent believes he lost it years ago, but I found it in his office while organizing documents. It's not just a family heirloom. The inscription inside contains the account numbers for his hidden offshore accounts. He never declared these accounts to the SEC during any of his company's acquisitions. I'm entrusting this to you because I've seen you fight for justice in your corporate law cases. You don't back down, even in the face of powerful adversaries. The media calls you the Iron Lady of Wall Street for a reason. If you're reading this, it means my children are now in Alexander's care. Please, help him protect them. Sophia is smart and brave, but she's already carried too much of an adult's burden. And Thomas, he has his father's eyes and determination. They both deserve a chance at happiness. I know I'm asking a lot of you, considering how much I've disrupted your life. But sometimes the right path isn't the easy one. Trust your instincts, Victoria. They've never failed you. With hope and gratitude, Clara Martin. Victoria leaned back, Clara's words resonating deeply within her. She examined the ring, finding the small numbers skillfully engraved inside the band. The USB drive contained detailed documentation of Colombo's plans, including recordings of private conversations and copies of falsified financial documents. Her phone vibrated, a message from James. Colombo had arrived early at Montgomery Industries, accompanied by his lawyers. The board meeting had been moved up to 9:30, leaving them less time than expected. Victoria quickly photographed the ring's inscription and copied the contents of the USB drive to her secure cloud storage. She couldn't risk carrying the original evidence. Colombo's associates would be watching. Instead, she resealed everything in the envelope and placed it in a new safety deposit box, this time under her law firm's corporate account. Just as she stepped out of the vault, she found Rebecca Conti waiting with a worried expression. Mrs. Romanoff, there are 2 men in the lobby asking for you. They claim to be from the legal department of Colombo Enterprises. Victoria's mind raced through the options. The bank's private client area had a separate exit, usually used by celebrities and wealthy clients who valued discretion. But using it might alert Colombo that she had found something significant. Making a quick decision, Victoria pulled out her phone and called Martha. I need a diversion, she said in a low voice. Something to draw attention away from the bank's main entrance. She could almost hear Martha's efficient mind weighing the possibilities. Give me 2 minutes, replied the wedding planner. Then walk out the main door like you own the place. Trust me. The executive boardroom of Montgomery Industries was tense as the board members entered the main meeting room. Alexander stood by the window, watching the city wake up as he mentally prepared for the upcoming battle. His phone showed a simple message from Victoria. I have it. Proof of everything. Keep them busy for 20 minutes. Vincent Colombo entered the meeting room with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. His expensive suit and practiced smile couldn't quite hide the predatory glint in his eyes. Alexander, he greeted casually, I'm surprised you managed to tear yourself away from your new family obligations. The other board members watched the exchange with barely concealed interest. Most had known Alexander for years. Some had even seen him grow up in this company. But business was business, and Colombo had spent months quietly cultivating their doubts about Alexander's leadership. "Before we begin," Colombo announced, "I propose we discuss the current leadership crisis within the company. Recent events have raised serious questions about Mr. Montgomery's judgment and ability to lead this organization." He distributed folders containing carefully prepared documents highlighting alleged managerial failures. Alexander remained calm, remembering Sophia's brave face in the hospital. "By recent events, I assume you mean your attempt to manipulate my personal life to gain control of this company." His direct approach caused several board members to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Colombo's smile faltered slightly. "I'm simply concerned about the stability of the company. Your involvement with a former employee, a child born out of wedlock, a very public scandal, these things affect shareholder confidence." He turned to the board. "The markets are already reacting negatively." "Interesting that you mention former employees," Alexander replied, his voice steady. "Let's talk about Clara Martin." The mention of her name caused Colombo to pause for a moment. "She worked for you after leaving the Grand Hotel Marina, didn't she?" Before Colombo could respond, the door to the meeting room opened. Victoria Romanov entered with determined steps, impeccably dressed and holding a leather briefcase. Several board members whispered in surprise. No one had expected the ex-fiancée of Alexander Montgomery to appear at this meeting. "I apologize for the interruption," Victoria said professionally. "But as the head of the legal department at Montgomery Industries, I believe the board should review this information before making any decisions." She began distributing documents from her briefcase. Colombo's composure cracked slightly. "Ms. Romanov, this is a confidential board meeting. Your personal relationship with Mr. Montgomery represents a clear conflict of interest." He turned to the board chairman. "I must object to her presence." "Actually," Victoria replied, "my presence is required by the corporate bylaws when discussing leadership changes, and these documents have nothing to do with personal relationships." She activated the presentation screen, displaying financial records that made several board members gasp. "What you're seeing," she continued, "is evidence of systematic corporate espionage and fraud conducted through the Colombo Enterprises charity event program. Mr. Colombo used these occasions to gather confidential information, manipulate stocks, and attempt hostile takeovers through shell companies." Colombo stood abruptly. "These accusations are ridiculous. You can't prove—" "Clara Martin could," Alexander interrupted. "That's why you were so desperate to find those letters, wasn't it? She documented everything." He watched as Colombo's confident expression began to falter. Victoria displayed another document. "This is a record of offshore accounts held by shell companies controlled by Colombo Enterprise, accounts that were never disclosed during any of your company's acquisitions, in direct violation of SEC regulations." The board chairman, Edward Pierce, leaned forward with intense interest. "Ms. Romanov, are you prepared to validate the authenticity of these documents?" His tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "The SEC has already received copies," Victoria confirmed. "They are particularly interested in the link between these accounts and certain charitable foundations." She met Colombo's furious gaze with unwavering professionalism. "As is the FBI's Financial Crimes Division." Colombo's composure finally crumbled. "You're bluffing. There's no way you have access to those accounts. The records were destroyed." His outburst made several board members flinch. "Really?" Victoria asked calmly. "Or did Clara Martin ensure they would be found by someone who knew how to use them?" She turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest we take a short recess while security escorts Mr. Colombo out of the building. I believe law enforcement representatives are already waiting in the lobby." The afternoon sun filtered through the hospital windows as Victoria sat in Thomas's room, watching the baby sleep peacefully. The events at Montgomery Industries had dominated the financial news, with Colombo's downfall overshadowing the scandal of the previous marriage. Sophia had curled up next to Victoria on the window seat, drawing pictures in her sketchbook. "Will Mr. Colombo go away?" Sophia asked softly, carefully moving her crayon across the paper. "Mom would be happy that you stopped him. She always said the truth would come out sooner or later." The wisdom in her young voice made Victoria's heart ache. "Yes, sweetheart. He won't bother you anymore," Victoria reassured her, amazed at how natural it felt to comfort this child who had entered her life so dramatically. "Your mum was very brave and very smart. She protected you and Thomas the best way she could." The door opened quietly as Alexander entered, looking exhausted but relieved. He had spent hours with the board, addressing concerns and stabilizing the company's leadership. His tie was loosened, and his usually perfect hair showed signs of having been run through his fingers multiple times due to stress. "The SEC has frozen Colombo's assets," he reported, walking over to check on Thomas. "They're particularly interested in those offshore accounts Clara uncovered." He gently adjusted the baby's blanket, his touch tender and protective. "The board has given their full support to maintain the current leadership." Victoria nodded, professional satisfaction mingling with more complex emotions. "James is working with the regulatory teams now. Colombo's entire operation is unraveling." She watched as Alexander's shoulders finally relaxed, the tension of the past 2 days beginning to ease. Sophia tugged on Victoria's sleeve, showing her the drawing she had been working on. It depicted 4 figures standing together: a man, a woman, a little girl, and a baby. "Do you think we could be like this?" she asked hesitantly. "Like a real family?" The question hung between Alexander and Victoria, laden with unspoken possibilities. Before either could respond, Dr. Rodriguez entered with the results of Thomas's latest tests. "I have good news," she announced, smiling warmly. "Thomas is ready to be discharged tomorrow. His weight has stabilized and all his vitals are excellent." She turned to Alexander. "Have you made arrangements for home care?" The question highlighted the practical challenges ahead. Alexander's penthouse was designed for a single lifestyle, not for raising 2 children. "I've started looking for family-friendly properties," he admitted, "something with a garden near good schools." Victoria found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "The Romanov estate has a guest house," she offered. "It's fully furnished, with its own garden and a security system. You could stay there while you look for something permanent." She felt Sophia's grip on her hand tighten with hope. Alexander met her gaze, understanding the importance of what she was offering. "Victoria, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," she interrupted. "I'm offering. The children need a safe place to adjust to their new life away from the media's attention." She glanced at Sophia's drawing. "And it would give us all the time to figure things out. Everything." Sophia looked at them in turn, her young face serious. "Mum used to say that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose," she said softly. She said love isn't always easy, but it's worth fighting for. Dr. Rodriguez excused herself discreetly, leaving the makeshift family to their discussion. Alexander moved to sit on the other side of Sophia, creating a moment of quiet intimacy in the hospital room. "The guest house has 3 bedrooms, Victoria continued, her professional tone masking her emotional involvement. "Martha has already contacted a company specialized in emergency furnishings for families in transition. They can have everything ready by tomorrow. Cribs, children's furniture, whatever you need." Alexander shook his head in amazement. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" His voice carried a mix of gratitude and something deeper. "Just like you thought to check that safe deposit box even though you didn't know what you'd find." "Clara trusted me," Victoria said simply. "She believed I would do the right thing even before she knew me. I can't let her down now." She looked again at Sophia's drawing, at the family the girl had imagined. "Besides, these children deserve a chance at happiness." The guest house on the Romanov estate was nestled among ancient oak trees, its warm lights glowing invitingly in the evening darkness. Martha Sanders had outdone herself, transforming the space into a perfect family home in less than 24 hours. The kitchen was stocked, the nursery equipped with everything Thomas might need, and Sophia's room had been decorated with soft shades of purple and butterflies, a touching tribute to her mother's precious box. Victoria stood in the kitchen of the main house, preparing a welcome dinner while her mother, Eleanor Romanoff, arranged flowers from their garden. The situation was unprecedented, hosting her ex-fiancé and his newly discovered children, but Eleanor had surprised everyone with her immediate acceptance. Clara Martin must have been an extraordinary woman, Eleanor reflected, selecting another rose. To protect her children so cleverly, to trust in our family's sense of justice. She looked at her daughter, and to see in you the strength we always knew you had. Victoria carefully checked the lasagna, a recipe that had always been Alexander's favorite. I keep thinking about her letter, she admitted, how she watched me from afar, judged my character, trusted me with her children's future. The responsibility felt enormous, yet somehow right. The sound of arriving cars signaled the family's arrival from the hospital. Sophia's excited voice could be heard across the garden as she discovered the swing hanging from one of the oak trees. Thomas's happy gurgling joined his sister's laughter, the joyful sounds filling the evening air. Alexander appeared at the kitchen door looking both exhausted and peacefully content. "Sophia is in heaven," he announced, smiling, "and Thomas hasn't cried once since we left the hospital." He paused, taking in the domestic scene before him. "Victoria, this is more than I could have hoped for." Eleanor tactfully excused herself, leaving them alone in the kitchen. Victoria busied herself with dinner preparations, trying to maintain some emotional distance. "The guest house is yours for as long as you need it," she said professionally. "My father's security team has already installed additional measures." "And, Victoria," Alexander interrupted gently, stepping closer, "can we talk? Really talk?" His voice carried the weight of their shared history and the possibilities of their future. Before she could respond, Sophia burst into the kitchen, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Miss Victoria, there's a treehouse and a garden with butterflies. Can I help plant the flowers like the ones on Mom's special box?" Her enthusiasm was contagious, breaking the tension between the adults. "Of course you can," Victoria found herself smiling. "We can start tomorrow if you'd like. The garden has always been my special project." She showed Sophia the fresh herbs she was using for dinner, explaining the purpose of each. Alexander watched them together, noticing how naturally Victoria interacted with Sophia. Thomas, secure in his carrier, leaned toward Victoria with a happy smile. The scene felt right in a way he couldn't quite explain. "I never properly thanked you," he said softly when Sophia went to explore the garden. "Not just for the evidence against Colombo, but for opening your home, your life to us." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to ensure their privacy. "I know I hurt you, Victoria. The situation with Clara, keeping Thomas a secret, even though I didn't know about him. I should have been honest about that summer." Victoria finally met his gaze, allowing her professional mask to slip slightly. "We both know life isn't simple," she said gently. "Clara understood that. She didn't blame you for moving on with your life, and she trusted me even though she knew I was your fiancé." She looked out the window at Sophia, who was showing her grandmother the tire swing. "These children need stability, love, and protection. Everything else we can figure out in time." Thomas chose that moment to demand attention, his little hands reaching out for Victoria again. Without thinking, she lifted him from the carrier, cradling him naturally against her shoulder. The baby immediately snuggled closer, content in her arms. "He knows," Alexander said softly, watching them. "Both of them know they're safe here, with you." His voice carried a depth of emotion that made Victoria's heart race. "I know we have a lot to face, but seeing you with them, watching you fight to protect them, it reminds me of all the reasons I fell in love with you in the first place." A week passed in the quiet routine of the Romanov estate. The gardens bloomed with new life as Sophia, under Victoria's guidance, learned to tend to her small plot of flowers. She had chosen purple milkweed and silver-leafed lavender, creating a living tribute to her mother's precious box. The morning sun found Victoria and Sophia in their garden sanctuary, their hands dirty from planting spring bulbs. Thomas slept nearby in a specially designed outdoor crib, shielded from the sun but able to feel the gentle breeze. "Mom would have loved this garden," Sophia said thoughtfully, smoothing the soil around a young plant. "She always tried to keep flowers on the windowsill, even though our apartment didn't get much sun. She looked up at Victoria, her eyes wise beyond her years. Do you think she knew we'd end up here? Victoria considered the question carefully. I think your mum hoped we'd find our way here, she answered honestly. She believed in creating something beautiful out of difficult situations. She watched Sophia as she processed this answer, noticing how the girl seemed more at ease with each passing day. Alexander watched them from the porch of the guest house, his heart full at the sight. The past week had brought subtle but significant changes. Sophia's nightmares had lessened, Thomas was thriving, and the tension between him and Victoria had begun to transform into something new, something hopeful. James arrived with his morning briefing but paused at the domestic scene before him. The media circus is finally dying down, he reported quietly. Colombo's arrest has overshadowed everything else. The SEC investigation has revealed similar schemes in other companies. He's been doing this for years. And the legal status of the children? Asked Alexander, his eyes still fixed on Sophia and Victoria in the garden. The issue of custody and guardianship had been a constant concern. The family court judge is fast-tracking everything, James reassured him. Given the circumstances and the DNA confirmation, full custody should be granted within a few weeks. Sophia's situation is more complex, but her mother's letters expressing her wishes carry significant weight. Their conversation was interrupted by Thomas's happy gurgling as he woke from his nap. Victoria moved naturally to pick him up, her professional attire replaced by comfortable gardening clothes that showed how much her life had changed in just 1 week. She's incredible with them, James observed, watching his sister comfort the baby while helping Sophia transplant a seedling. I've never seen her like this, so spontaneous, so natural. Alexander nodded, emotions tightening his throat. She's become their safe harbor, he said softly. Sophia talks to her about Clara shares memories she was too afraid to discuss before, and Thomas, he lights up every time she enters the room. Inside the main house, Eleanor Romanoff and Martha Sanders sat reviewing renovation plans for the guest house. What had started as a temporary solution was evolving into something more permanent, though no one had directly addressed this shift. The East Wing could easily be expanded, Martha noted, her event planning skills seamlessly transitioning into home renovation. A true suite for Thomas, a larger room for Sophia with a study area, and a main suite overlooking the gardens. Eleanor smiled conspiratorially. And the connection to the main house through the greenhouse, she suggested, for easier family dinners and impromptu visits? Both women had observed with quiet satisfaction the increasingly close bonds among the members of their unconventional family. In the garden, Sophia had finished planting her latest additions and was carefully writing labels for each variety. Her education had been fragmented during Clara's illness, but Victoria had discovered the girl's quick mind and love for learning. Could we make a butterfly garden? Sophia asked hopefully. With plants that attract real butterflies? Mom always said butterflies were special because they showed how beautiful change could be. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes at the profound wisdom in Clara's teachings. That's a wonderful idea, she agreed. We can look up which flowers work best in our climate. Maybe we could even document the different species that visit, like a scientific study. Thomas chose that moment to grab a strand of Victoria's hair, his little face lighting up with a radiant smile. These moments of pure joy were becoming more frequent, healing the wounds of the past week, with every shared laugh and tender interaction. Evening fell over the Romanoff estate like a soft blanket, bringing with it a peaceful quiet. Victoria was sitting in the main house's library, reviewing legal documents for Thomas's custody hearing, when Alexander found her. He carried 2 cups of the chamomile tea she always drank in the evenings. Sophia finally fell asleep, he reported, setting a cup beside her. She wanted to thank you again for helping her with the butterfly garden project. She's already sketching plans for different flower arrangements. Victoria accepted the tea with a small smile, remembering how Sophia had spent the afternoon carefully coloring in her garden notebook. She has Clara's eye for design, she observed, and her determination to create beauty wherever she can. Alexander sat in the chair across from her, his tea untouched. Victoria, we need to talk about what happens next, he said gently. This Past week has been incredible. Seeing you with the children, seeing how naturally you've embraced them, it's more than I could have hoped for. They make it easy, Victoria admitted, setting aside her documents. Sophia is so brave, so willing to trust despite everything she's been through. And Thomas, she smiled, thinking of the baby's giggles that morning. He reminds me that joy can be found in the simplest moments. I've been thinking about Clara's letter to you, Alexander continued cautiously, about how she observed you, learned your character from afar. She saw something in you that I've always known, your capacity for compassion, your unwavering strength. Victoria felt her professional barriers begin to crack. She trusted me to protect her children, she said softly. Even knowing who I was, what we meant to each other, he believed I would put their needs first. Just like you did in church, Alexander acknowledged. When Sophia appeared with Thomas, your first instinct wasn't anger or humiliation. You immediately focused on protecting them from Columbo. The memory of that day in church, just a week, ego but feeling like an eternity, lingered between them. Victoria stood up, walking toward the window overlooking the gardens. In the moonlight, she could see Sophia's butterfly garden taking shape. I was angry, she finally admitted. Not at the children, never at them, but at the situation, at the secrets, at how everything I had planned shattered in an instant. She turned to Alexander. And then I saw how scared Sophia was, how fragile Thomas looked, and nothing else mattered. Alexander joined her at the window, carefully maintaining a respectful distance. The renovation plans Martha and your mother are discussing, he began. They're beautiful, but I need to know, is this what you want? Having us here, changing your life so drastically? Victoria remained silent for a long time, organizing her thoughts, while helping Sophia in the garden. Today she said something Clara used to say. Home isn't a place, it's the people who make you feel safe enough to grow. These children, and they've already taken root in my heart. And us? Alexander asked gently. What Clara wrote about that summer, about how I spoke of you, it was all true. Even then, even during that brief time with her, you were always on my mind. I never stopped loving you, Victoria. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Through the open window, they could hear the gentle trickle of the garden fountain and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Love isn't always simple, Victoria echoed Sophia's words from days before, but sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in unexpected places. Finally, she turned fully toward him. I'm not ready for everything to go back to how it was before. We need time, all of us, to grow together, to heal. Alexander nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. We can take it slow, he agreed. Focus on the children, on building something new. He hesitated before adding, I see the way Sophia looks at you, how she's already starting to bloom under your care. And Thomas, he's happier here than I've ever seen him. The butterfly garden flourished under the warm spring sun, becoming a sanctuary of color and life. Sophia stood proudly at the center of her creation, carefully documenting a newly emerged monarch butterfly in the nature journal Victoria had gifted her. Thomas sat nearby in his outdoor playpen, mesmerized by the dancing shadows of leaves and wings. Look, exclaimed Sophia as the monarch took flight, its orange and black wings catching the sunlight. That's the third new species this week. Mom was right about butterflies bringing good luck. She made a careful sketch in her journal, adding notes about the date and time of the sighting. Victoria watched from the garden bench, her laptop forgotten beside her. The past month had brought extraordinary changes to their lives. The renovation of the guest house was nearly complete, transforming the space into a true family home, while still maintaining its connection to the main house. The court hearing for the family is tomorrow, Alexander said softly, joining her. On the bench. He had just returned from a council meeting, his tie loosened in that casual way that had become normal since they moved to the estate. James says everything is in order. The judge has reviewed all the documentation. Victoria nodded, her legal mind automatically revisiting the preparations they had made. Sophia's teacher sent an enthusiastic report about her progress, she shared, and Dr. Rodriguez's evaluation of Thomas's development was excellent. The results of the home study were perfect. They watched as Sophia showed Thomas a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower, the child's joyful laughter filling the garden. The scene felt so natural, so right, that it made Victoria's heart ache with its simple beauty. "I received a letter from Clara's friend at the Grand Hotel Marina," Alexander said calmly. "She found some photographs Clara had kept from that summer." He hesitated before continuing. "There's a picture of all of us at the charity gala. You, me, and Clara in the background watching over us. Even then, she was protecting us both." Victoria remembered that night, how she had sensed something different in Alexander, but hadn't understood why. Now, knowing Clara had been there, watching over them and protecting them in her own way, that memory took on new meaning. "The renovation team found something in the guest house wall today," she said, changing the subject. "An old letter, written by my grandmother to my grandfather during their courtship. It talked about building a life together, about how love grows stronger when tested by hardship." Sophia approached them, her journal clutched proudly to her chest. "Can I show you my butterfly catalogue?" she asked Victoria. "I organized them by species and color, just like you taught me." Her face lit up at the praise she received for her careful documentation. "Miss Victoria," Sophia's voice turned serious as she settled between them on the bench. "Tomorrow in court, when they make everything official, will you still be part of our family?" The question held all the vulnerability of a child who had already lost so much. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes as she hugged Sophia tightly. "Oh, sweetheart, I will always be part of your family. Family isn't just about legal documents. It's about love, trust, and choosing to be there for each other every day." Alexander watched them, his emotions clear in his gaze. "Your mother knew," she added softly. "She chose Victoria to help protect you and Thomas because she saw the love in her heart. Sometimes the best families are the ones we build together." Thomas began to fuss in his crib, stretching his little arms toward them with determination. Victoria moved naturally to pick him up, settling him on her lap, where he immediately grabbed Sophia's journal with his curious little hands. "Careful, Thomas," Sophia laughed, holding the journal so he could see the pictures. "These are your butterflies too. Mom said butterflies are special because they show us that beautiful changes take time." She looked at Victoria and Alexander. "Like us becoming a family." The wisdom in her words struck them both. Victoria met Alexander's gaze over the children's heads, seeing in his expression the same mix of love, hope, and quiet determination she felt in her own heart. A new butterfly with bright blue wings landed on the bench beside them. Sophia quickly opened her journal to a fresh page, ready to document this latest visitor to their garden. "See," she whispered, "another sign of good luck." The family courtroom had nothing in common with the austere corporate meeting rooms Victoria usually frequented. Warm wood panels and comfortable seating created a welcoming atmosphere for families whose lives would be shaped by the decisions made here. Judge Patricia Winters, known for her compassionate approach to family cases, carefully reviewed the final documents. Sophia sat between Alexander and Victoria, wearing the dress she had chosen especially for this day, purple with tiny silver butterflies embroidered along the hem. Thomas, secure in Victoria's arms, happily played with the small silver locket she had given him containing a photo of Clara. "The court has thoroughly reviewed all documentation," announced Judge Winters, her kind eyes observing the family before her. "The DNA confirmation, character references, the results of the home study, and most importantly, the clear wishes expressed by Clara Martin in her letters and legal documents." The judge smiled warmly at Sophia. "Young lady, your mother was a very wise woman. She made sure you and your brother would be protected and loved." She turned to Alexander. "Mr. Montgomery, the court grants you full legal custody of both children, honoring Miss Martin's wishes for you to raise them." Sophia squeezed Alexander and Victoria's hands, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. The judge, however, wasn't finished. She pulled out another document, this one bearing the Romanov family crest. "We have an additional request before the court," continued Judge Winters. "Miss Victoria Romanov has applied for legal guardianship of both children to serve alongside Mr. Montgomery as co-guardian." She looked directly at Sophia. "This means Victoria would legally be part of your family, with the right and responsibility to help care for you and Thomas. How do you feel about that?" Sophia's face lit up with joy. "Really?" she asked, looking between Victoria and Alexander, "like a real family?" The hope in her voice moved everyone in the courtroom. "Your mother specifically mentioned Miss Romanoff in her letters," the judge explained kindly. "She believed Victoria would be an excellent maternal figure for both of you. Do you agree?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "Victoria helps me with my butterfly garden and with my homework. She knows how to make Thomas laugh when he's sad, and she tells us stories about Mom that make us happy instead of making us cry." Her simple and sincere testimony brought tears to Victoria's eyes. Judge Winters smiled. "Then I am very happy to grant this petition as well. Congratulations. You are officially a family in the eyes of the law, though it's clear you already were in your hearts." Outside the courthouse, Eleanor was waiting with Martha, both ready to celebrate. The renovation team had worked all night to prepare a surprise. The butterfly garden had been decorated with tiny lights, creating a magical atmosphere for their first official family lunch. "There's another surprise," Martha announced when they arrived home. She led them to the new children's room, where a beautiful mural covered one wall. Butterflies of all colors seemed to dance across the surface, surrounding a portrait of Clara holding little Thomas, with Sophia by her side. "Mum," Sophia whispered, gently touching the mural. The artist had perfectly captured Clara's sweet smile, creating a permanent memory of her love and wisdom. Victoria knelt beside Sophia, still holding Thomas, who reached out toward the image of his mother with a happy gurgle. "Your mum will always be part of our family," she reassured both children. "She brought us together, taught us love and trust, and gave us the chance to become something beautiful." Alexander embraced them all, forming a circle of love and protection. "Clara knew that family isn't about perfect beginnings," he said softly. "It's about choosing to love each other, growing together and facing anything as one unit." Sophia looked at them, her young face serene. "Like the butterflies in my garden," she said wisely. "They start as something small and turn into something beautiful because they have a safe place to grow." She touched the silver butterflies on her dress. "Mum would be happy to see us together like this." 3 months had passed since the court hearing, and the gardens of the Romanoff estate were in full summer bloom. The butterfly garden had become a local attraction, with Sophia proudly leading tours for visiting school groups, teaching them about butterfly species and the importance of creating safe spaces for transformation. Victoria sat at the garden table, reviewing the final documents from Vincent's sentencing. The SEC investigation had uncovered a decades-long web of financial fraud, ensuring he would never threaten their family again. But today, those documents seemed less important than the scene before her. Sophia was helping Thomas take his first unsteady steps along the garden paths, the child's happy laughter mingling with his sister's words of encouragement. "Just a few more steps, Thomas. Look, there's a butterfly right in front of you." The little one stretched out his chubby hands, trying to grasp the dancing wings. Alexander stepped out from the guest house, though no one called it that anymore. The renovation had turned it into a true family home, connected to the main house through a beautiful porch filled with Clara's favorite flowers. "The board meeting went well," he reported, joining Victoria at the table. "Montgomery Industries. Stocks have fully recovered. The new charitable foundation we established in Clara's name is already helping single mothers return to school." His hand found Victoria's, their fingers intertwining naturally. Martha appeared from the main house carrying a large portfolio. "Everything is ready for tomorrow," she announced with satisfaction. "Though I must say, organizing this celebration has been very different from the last one I arranged for you two." Victoria smiled, recalling the elaborate wedding that never happened. "This feels right," she said softly. "Simple, meaningful, focused on family." She watched as Thomas finally reached Sophia's butterfly bush, his sister's steady hands supporting his triumph. "Miss Victoria," Sophia called excitedly. Thomas walked all the way to the purple butterfly plant, Mom's favorite. Her face glowed with pride at her little brother's achievement. "Can we take a picture for his memory album?" The memory album had been Sophia's idea, a way to document the growth of their family, just as she documented her butterflies. Each page contained photos, pressed flowers from the garden, and Sophia's careful observations about their daily life. Eleanor joined them, carrying a tray of lemonade and cookies. "The photographer just called to confirm tomorrow's appointment," she announced, "though I doubt any professional photo could capture the magic of this moment." She smiled as Thomas abandoned his walking practice to crawl quickly toward the cookies. "Have you finished your speech for tomorrow?" Alexander asked Sophia, who had declared herself the family's official spokesperson. The girl nodded seriously, pulling out her butterfly journal where she had written her notes. "I'll talk about how butterflies show us that change can be beautiful," she explained, "and how sometimes the best families are built with love and trust, just like my butterfly garden." She paused, suddenly shy. "Do you think Mom would have liked it?" Victoria gently hugged Sophia. "Your mom would have loved it, sweetheart. She understood before any of us that love isn't about perfect beginnings. It's about choosing to grow." "Together?" She kissed her forehead, marveling at how natural those gestures had become. Thomas, not wanting to be left out, climbed into Victoria's lap, leaving cookie crumbs on her summer dress. No one minded. Formal attire and perfect appearances had given way to the comfortable reality of family life. "I found something among Clara's papers this morning," Alexander said quietly, pulling out an envelope. "A letter she wrote the day Thomas was born. It described a dream she had about a garden full of butterflies, where her children would be safe and loved." He looked around their flourishing sanctuary. Somehow, she knew this was waiting for them. Sophia carefully took the letter, adding it to her growing collection of memories. "Mom always said that dreams show us the way home," she said wisely. "She dreamed of this place, of us as a family, and now it's real." The gardens of the Romanov estate had never been more beautiful. Twinkling lights hung from the ancient oak trees, creating a canopy of stars above the flower-lined paths. White chairs were arranged in the butterfly garden, where the carefully tended flowers by Sophia formed a natural altar of purple and silver blooms. This wedding would not be like the elaborate cathedral ceremony planned a year before. Instead of hundreds of high society guests, only close family and dearest friends filled the chairs. Martha had outdone herself with the simple elegance of the decorations, understanding that true beauty lay in the journey that had brought them here. In the main house, Victoria stood before the mirror, wearing a simple silk dress that moved like butterfly wings. Sophia helped her adjust the flower crown, made with the blooms they had grown together in their garden. "You look like a butterfly." "Princess," declared Sophia, her dress echoing the color of the purple butterfly plant she had grown from seeds. "And look, Thomas matches too." The toddler, now steady on his feet, wore a tiny suit with a purple bow tie. Eleanor appeared at the door, tears glistening in her eyes. "Everything is ready," she announced. "Alexander is waiting in the garden with Judge Winters. The same judge who had made them a legal family would now unite them in marriage." Victoria knelt to Sophia's height, careful with her dress. "Are you ready, sweetheart? This is an important moment for all of us." Sophia nodded, her face serious with the responsibility of her role as both flower girl and ring bearer. "Mum would be so happy," Sophia said softly, touching the silver butterfly necklace that had belonged to Clara. She wrote in her letters that true love is like a butterfly. It might take time to emerge, but when it does, it's beautiful. Thomas toddled over, drawn by the emotion in his sister's voice. Victoria hugged both children, marveling at how they had transformed her life. "Your mom gave us an extraordinary gift," she whispered. "She showed us that love can grow in unexpected places." The garden paths were lined with candles in purple glass holders, leading to the butterfly garden where the guests awaited. As soft music began, Sophia took Thomas's hand, helping him toddle down the aisle, scattering flower petals. Their natural joy brought smiles to every face. Victoria walked alone, following her children, because they truly were hers now, toward Alexander. He stood under an arch covered with Clara's favorite flowers, his eyes filled with love for his family. Judge Winters smiled warmly as Victoria joined them. "When I first met this family in my courtroom," she began, "I saw something special. A love that had weathered storms, a trust that had been tested and emerged stronger, and 2 children who showed us the true meaning of family. Sophia stood proudly between Victoria and Alexander, holding Thomas, who was unusually calm, as if sensing the importance of the moment. Clara Martin was an extraordinary woman, the judge continued. She understood that love isn't about perfect moments, but perfect hearts coming together in their own time. The vows they exchanged were simple yet profound. They promised to nurture their garden of love, protect their family's butterfly, sanctuary, and always remember that the most beautiful transformations come from having a safe place to grow. Mum wrote about this day, Sophia announced during her carefully prepared speech. Not exactly this day, but one like it. She said sometimes, love takes a different path than we expect, but if we trust the journey, it leads us exactly where we need to be. As Victoria and Alexander sealed their vows with a kiss, a cloud of butterflies rose from Sophia's garden, their wings catching the last rays of the sunset. Thomas clapped with joy at the sight, while Sophia beamed with pride at her flourishing creation. The reception was held in the greenhouse, where Clara's portrait smiled over the celebration. Fairy lights sparkled among the flowers, creating a magical atmosphere that perfectly captured their journey, from shattered dreams to a beautiful reality. A year had passed since the garden wedding, and the Romanov estate buzzed with activity, as preparations were underway for Thomas's 2nd birthday party. Sophia, now confident and thriving in her role as the older sister, had insisted on a butterfly theme, transforming the garden into an enchanted wonderland. Victoria stood in the nursery, watching Thomas chase a beam of sunlight on the floor. Clara's mural still watched over them, though now it was surrounded by family photos documenting their journey. Thomas's first steps, Sophia's victory at the Buell Science Fair with her butterfly research project, quiet moments of their growing family. The Clara Martin Foundation approved 10 new scholarships today, Alexander announced, entering with a stack of papers. Single mothers pursuing degrees in economics and environmental studies. He wrapped his arms around Victoria, both watching Thomas play. Clara would have loved knowing how many lives she's still touching. Sophia burst into the room, her butterfly journal clutched excitedly in her hands. "You won't believe what happened in the garden," she exclaimed. "Remember that rare butterfly species I've been trying to attract? It finally came, and it laid eggs on the new plants we added last month." Victoria smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. The butterfly garden had grown into a recognized conservation project, with Sophia's detailed documentation being used by local schools and environmental groups. At 11, she was already showing signs of following both Clara's creative vision and Victoria's methodical approach to challenges. "Perfect timing for your presentation next week," Victoria reminded her. Sophia had been invited to speak at a youth environmental conference about the importance of creating sustainable habitats. Her story of building the butterfly garden as a tribute to her mother had touched many hearts. "I found something else," Sophia said, her voice softening. She pulled a slightly worn envelope from her journal. It was pressed between the pages of Mom's old event planning book. It's addressed to today's date. Alexandra and Victoria exchanged surprised glances as Sophia carefully opened the letter. Clara's familiar handwriting flowed across the page. "My dear children, if you're reading this, then Thomas is turning 2, an age I always imagined would be full of adventures and discoveries. I hope he's running through the gardens, chasing butterflies and filling your lives with laughter. Sophia, my brave girl, I know you've helped create the safe haven I always dreamed of for our family. Your strength and capacity to love continue to amaze me even now. Victoria and Alexander, thank you for proving that love can transform and grow in the most unexpected ways. Thank you for giving my children the family they deserve. Remember, butterflies don't just show us beauty, they show us resilience. Every flight makes them stronger, every transformation more magnificent. Keep growing together, keep loving fiercely, and always remember that sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in unexpected moments of change. With eternal love, Clara." Thomas toddled over to Sophia as she finished reading, his curious hands reaching for the letter. "Mama," he said clearly, pointing to Clara's photo on the wall. Then he turned to Victoria with a radiant smile. "Mom!" That simple word held so much meaning. the acknowledgement of both the mother who had given him life and the mother who had helped him grow. Victoria felt tears welling up in her eyes as she held both children close. Sophia had started calling her mom months earlier, a natural evolution of their deepening bond. But hearing Thomas express his understanding of their unique family touched her heart in a new way. The butterfly garden had never felt more alive than on the afternoon of Thomas's birthday party. The children from Sophia's environmental club ran along the paths, learning about different species from their enthusiastic young teacher. The Clara Martin Foundation had arranged for butterfly experts to attend, validating Sophia's research and conservation efforts. Martha Sanders, who had remained a dear friend of the family, oversaw the party arrangements with her usual efficiency. But unlike the formal events of their past, this celebration was filled with joyful chaos, children's laughter, casual conversations, and the natural beauty of their lush garden. "I can't believe how much has changed in just 1 year," Eleanor reflected, watching her grandchildren with pride. "This garden has become a symbol of hope for so many people." She gestured toward the families gathered around them, beneficiaries of the foundation's support, environmental activists inspired by Sophia's work, and friends who had stood by them throughout their journey. Victoria sat with Thomas on her lap, helping him blow out the candles on his butterfly-shaped cake. Sophia stood beside them, her face radiant with happiness as she led everyone in singing "Happy Birthday." Alexander captured the moment with his camera, adding another precious memory to their family's story. "Mom would have loved seeing all the beautiful things that have grown from her garden," Sophia said later as the party began to wind down. She sat between Victoria and Alexander on their favorite bench in the garden, with Thomas dozing on Victoria's shoulder. "She always said love was like planting seeds. You have to trust they'll grow into something beautiful." Alexander pulled out a small package wrapped in purple paper. "Speaking of your mom," he said softly, "we've been waiting for the right moment to give you this." Sophia carefully unwrapped it, revealing a silver locket identical to Thomas's, but with tiny butterflies engraved on the surface. Inside were 3 photos: Clara holding Sophia as a newborn, a recent family photo in their butterfly garden, and the picture taken at the Grand Hotel Marina that captured them all, Clara, Alexander, and Victoria, in a moment that had shaped their future. "Your mother created this path for us," Victoria explained, gently touching the locket. She understood that love isn't about perfect beginnings or fairy tale endings. It's about the courage to trust, the strength to transform, and the wisdom to recognize that family can flourish in unexpected places. Sophia fastened the locket around her neck, where it rested perfectly beside Clara's butterfly necklace. "Like the butterflies in my garden," she said wisely. "They don't know what color their wings will be when they transform, but they trust the process anyway." Thomas stirred sleepily, pointing to a monarch butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. "Pretty," he murmured, his free hand clutching Victoria's necklace, a habit that connected him to both of his mothers. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the garden, their family and friends gathered for one last photograph. The butterfly garden provided the perfect backdrop, with flowers swaying gently in the evening breeze. Sophia stood tall and confident, an arm around Thomas, while Victoria and Alexander completed the circle of their family. Just as Martha prepared to take the photo, a cloud of butterflies rose from the garden, their wings catching the light like a celebration of nature itself. Thomas's happy laughter mingled with Sophia's joyful exclamation, creating a moment of pure magic. "Clara was right," Alexander whispered to Victoria as they watched their children's wonder. "Sometimes the most beautiful stories don't follow the expected path. They transform like butterflies into something even more magnificent than we could have imagined." Victoria squeezed his hand, her heart full of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them there. Their garden had become more than just a memorial for Clara. It was a living testament to the power of love, trust, and the courage to embrace change. As the butterflies danced above them, their family stood united in the sanctuary they had built together, proof that sometimes life's greatest gifts come wrapped in moments of transformation, guided by the wisdom of a mother's love and the magic of new beginnings.